Bible Codex, Ancient Discoveries, Modern Revelations.
What if I told you that a 600-year-old prophecy from the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel contains a hidden warning about the next global oil crisis that could shake the foundations of our modern world? And what if the key to understanding this ancient mystery lies within the heritage and identity of the Hebrew Israelites, a people whose story has been buried beneath centuries of historical confusion and cultural displacement? Welcome to a journey that will challenge everything you thought you knew about biblical prophecy, ancient history, and the divine plan that connects all nations under one Creator. Today, we're diving deep into Ezekiel's visions of Gog and Magog, exploring archaeological discoveries that are rewriting history books, examining dead evidence that's sparking fierce debates, and uncovering how these ancient prophecies might be unfolding right before our eyes in today's energy-driven geopolitics. Picture this: ancient scrolls unfurling with glowing Hebrew text, revealing prophecies of nations coveting Israel's wealth. Now imagine modern oil rigs pumping the black gold that drives our global economy, while geopolitical tensions mirror the very conflicts Ezekiel warned about over 2 millennia ago. The connections are more startling than you might imagine. The Hebrew Israelites, communities primarily within African American heritage who claim descent from the ancient tribes of Israel, have long interpreted these prophecies through the lens of their own historical experience. Their narrative speaks of exile, oppression, and ultimate restoration, themes that echo through Ezekiel's visions like thunder across the centuries. But this isn't just their story. It's a story that belongs to all of us, because Ezekiel's prophecies speak to the destiny of all nations, all people, united under the sovereignty of the Most High. As we explore this fascinating intersection of ancient prophecy and modern reality, we'll examine cutting-edge archaeological discoveries from sites like Kiryat Yearim, where scientists have extracted dye from ancient Israelite tombs. We'll delve into the Dead Sea Scrolls and other extra-biblical texts that shed new light on Ezekiel's warnings. We'll trace the historical evidence of resource conflicts that mirror today's oil wars. And we'll celebrate the rich cultural heritage that connects ancient Israel to modern communities seeking their identity in biblical prophecy. But here's what makes this exploration truly compelling. We're not just looking at dusty historical artifacts or abstract theological concepts. We're examining how these ancient prophecies might be playing out in real time, as nations jostle for control of energy resources, as cultural identities are being rediscovered and celebrated, and as archaeological discoveries continue to surprise scholars and challenge conventional wisdom. The prophet Ezekiel, writing from Meloniacs LI 593 to 571 BC, received visions that have puzzled and fascinated interpreters for centuries. In chapters 39, he describes a great coalition of nations led by a mysterious figure called Gog from the land of Magog, who will attack a restored Israel in the latter days. The text speaks of these invaders coming to take a spoil and to take a prey as written in Ezekiel 38. What if this ancient spoil refers to the oil reserves that have made the Middle East the most contested region on earth? Think about it. Every major global conflict of the past century has somehow involved energy resources. The 1973 oil embargo brought Western economies to their knees. The Gulf Wars were fought over oil-rich territories. Today, nations rise and fall based on their ability to secure energy supplies. Could Ezekiel have foreseen this when he wrote about nations coveting Israel's wealth? The Hebrew Israelites bring a unique perspective to these prophecies. They see themselves as the fulfillment of Ezekiel's vision of the dry bones in chapter 37, where the prophet witnesses a valley of scattered bones coming back to life. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord, and set me down in the midst of the valley which was full of bones. Ezekiel writes for Hebrew Israeli communities, this represents their own spiritual and cultural awakening after centuries of displacement and oppression. Their interpretation draws heavily on Deuteronomy 28, where Moses describes the blessings and curses that would befall the Israelites based on their obedience to God's laws. Detailed in verses 5 through 8, speak slavery and scattering among the nations. And the Lord shall scatter thee among all people, from the one end of the earth even unto the other. Warns Duray 8:60. Hebrew Israelites see parallels between these ancient curses and the historical experience of African Americans, from the Middle Passage to centuries of oppression. But here's where it gets really interesting. Recent archaeological discoveries are adding new layers to this ancient story. At Kiryat Yearim, a biblical site mentioned in Samuel 7:1 as the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant, archaeologists have uncovered a First Temple-era family tome dating to 750–6050 BC. This discovery has yielded ancient Israelite data, providing the first genetic evidence from the time period when Ezekiel was prophesying. The genetic analysis reveals connections between ancient Israelites and Canaanite populations, supporting mainstream archaeological theories about Israelite origins. But it also raises fascinating questions about the genetic legacy of the scattered tribes. If the Israelites were indeed dispersed among the nations as the Bible describes, what happened to their genetic markers? Could some of these markers have survived in populations far from the Middle East? This is where the Hebrew Israelite narrative becomes particularly compelling. While mainstream geneticists point to the Canaanite connections in the Kiryat Yearim Dana, Hebrew Israelite advocates argue that this represents only one branch of the Israelite family tree. They point to genetic studies showing African ancestry in Jewish populations, particularly among Ethiopian Jews known as Beta Israel, and the Lemba people of Zimbabwe, who carry Semitic Y chromosome markers despite living in southern Africa. The debate over genetic evidence reflects a larger question about identity and heritage. As the Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians 3:28, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Christ Jesus." The Hebrew Israelite movement celebrates African American heritage while affirming that all people are part of God's plan, regardless of their ethnic background. Now, let's dive deeper into Ezekiel's actual prophecy and what it might mean for our modern world. In Ezekiel 2:3, God tells the prophet, "Set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal." These ancient names, Gog, Magog, Meshech, have sparked centuries of speculation. Ancient Jewish sources, including the Talmud and various Midrashic texts, identified these with various historical peoples and nations. The first-century Jewish historian Josephus connected Magog with the Scythians, a nomadic people who lived north of the Black Sea. Medieval Jewish commentators like Rashi saw connections to various European peoples. But here's where modern geopolitics enters the picture. Many contemporary interpreters identify these ancient names with modern nations. Some see Russia in the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, noting that Moscow and Tobolsk bear linguistic similarities to these ancient names. Others point to, which is explicitly mentioned in Ezekiel 38, Persia, along with Ethiopia and Libya. The prophecy describes this coalition coming against Israel in the latter years, when the people have been gathered out of many people, against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely all of them, as stated Ezekiel 38. This description of Israel being regathered from many nations after lying waste for centuries has led many to see the modern state of Israel, established in 1948, as a fulfillment of this prophecy. But here's the crucial detail that connects to our modern energy crisis. 30:12 describes the invaders' motivation as coming to take a spoil, and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the midst of the land. What is this spoil that makes Israel so attractive to these invading nations? In Ezekiel's time, it might have referred to agricultural wealth or trade goods, but in our modern context, could it refer to energy resources? Israel has discovered massive natural gas reserves in the Mediterranean, and the broader Middle East contains the world's largest oil reserves. The Hebrew word for spoil used here is shallow, which can refer to any valuable plunder or booty taken in war. The connection becomes even more intriguing when we consider the role of energy in modern geopolitics. The 1973 Yom Kippur War led directly to the oil embargo that quadrupled oil prices and sent shockwaves through the global economy. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 disrupted oil supplies and contributed to another energy crisis. More recently, conflicts in Iraq, Libya, and Syria have all involved struggles for control of energy resources. Could Ezekiel's prophecy be warning us about a future energy crisis that will make previous oil shocks look like minor inconveniences? The prophet describes divine intervention in this conflict, with God saying in Ezekiel 38:22, "And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him, and upon his bands, and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, and great hailstones, fire, and brimstone." This description of divine judgment through natural disasters has led some interpreters to see connections to climate change, natural disasters, or even nuclear warfare. The Hebrew word for fire used here is esh, which can refer to either literal fire or divine judgment. The word for brimstone is gophet, the same word used to describe the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19:10. Now, let's examine what archaeological evidence tells us about Ezekiel's world and how it might inform our understanding of his prophecies. The prophet lived during one of the most turbulent periods in ancient Near Eastern history, when the Babylonian Empire was expanding and conquering smaller kingdoms, including Judah. Archaeological excavations throughout the region have uncovered evidence of the resource conflicts that characterized this period. Assyrian inscriptions from Nineveh describe tribute demands from conquered peoples, often focusing on valuable commodities like metals, textiles, and agricultural products. The famous black obelisk of Shalmaneser I shows tribute bearers from various nations, including Israel, bringing goods to the Assyrian king. These ancient tribute lists read like modern trade agreements, detailing the flow of resources from periphery to center. The Tel Dan stele, discovered in northern Israel in 1993, mentions the House of David and provides archaeological confirmation of the biblical David's dynasty. This 9th century BC inscription shows that the kingdoms of Israel and Judah were significant enough to be mentioned in the records of their enemies. The Mesha stele, discovered in Jordan in 868, provides another fascinating glimpse into the resource conflicts of Ezekiel's era. This 9th century BC inscription describes King Mesha of Moab's rebellion against Israel, mentioning specific cities and territories that were contested between the two kingdoms. The stele reads, "King of Israel, he humbled Moab many years, for Chemosh was angry at his land." These archaeological discoveries paint a picture of a region where kingdoms regularly fought over territory, trade, and resource. The parallels to modern geopolitics are striking. Just as ancient kings fought for control of trade routes and tribute, modern nations compete for control of oil pipelines and energy markets. But the archaeological evidence also reveals something else: the remarkable resilience and cultural continuity of the Israelite people despite repeated conquests and exiles. Excavations at sites like Lachish, Megiddo, and Hazor show evidence of destruction and rebuilding, conquest and restoration. The people of ancient Israel survived the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom in 722 BC and the Babylonian conquest of Judah in 586 BC, maintaining their cultural and religious identity even in exile. This archaeological evidence of resilience resonates strongly with Hebrew Israelite communities today. They see their own history of survival through slavery and ongoing challenges as a continuation of this ancient pattern of exile and restoration. The archaeological record validates their narrative of a people who have endured despite overwhelming odds. Recent Dina studies have added another layer to this story. The extraction of ancient Dana from the Kiryat Yearim tomb represents a breakthrough in our understanding of ancient Israelite genetics. The preliminary results show genetic continuity with Canaanite populations, but they also reveal the complexity of ancient population movements and mixing. What's particularly interesting is that the Dina evidence doesn't contradict Hebrew Israelite claims so much as it complicates them. The genetic picture of the ancient Near East is far more complex than previously understood, with multiple waves of migration, conquest, and cultural exchange. The Israelites were clearly part of this broader Canaanite genetic pool, but they also had cultural and religious practices that distinguished them from their neighbors. The Hebrew Israelite interpretation of this evidence is nuanced. They don't necessarily claim to be genetically distinct from other populations, but rather that they represent a cultural and spiritual continuation of the ancient Israelite tradition. Their emphasis is on the covenant relationship with God described in the Hebrew Bible, not on genetic purity. This perspective aligns with the biblical understanding of Israel as a covenant people rather than merely an ethnic group. As Moses told the Israelites in Deuteronomy 7, "For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, above all people that are upon the face of the earth." The covenant relationship transcends genetics and ethnicity. The Hebrew Bible includes numerous examples of non-Israelites joining the covenant community, from Ruth the Moabite to the mixed multitude that left Egypt with the Israelites in Exodus 12:38. The prophet Isaiah speaks of a time when the stranger that joineth himself to the Lord will be welcomed into God's house, in Isaiah 56. This inclusive vision is central to Hebrew Israelite theology, even as they celebrate their particular heritage and identity. They see themselves as part of a larger divine plan that includes all nations and peoples. As Isaiah prophesied in chapter 2:3, "And it shall come to pass in the last days, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths." Now, let's connect these ancient prophecies to our modern world and explore how Ezekiel's warnings might be relevant to contemporary energy politics. The prophet's vision of nations coveting Israel's wealth takes on new meaning when we consider the role of energy resources in modern geopolitics. The Middle East contains approximately 40% of the world's proven oil reserves and 38% of its natural gas reserves. Israel itself has discovered massive natural gas fields in the Mediterranean, including the Leviathan field, which contains an estimated 22 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. These discoveries have transformed Israel from an energy importer to a potential energy exporter, fundamentally altering the geopolitical dynamics of the region. Could this be the spoil that Ezekiel prophesied would attract the attention of Gog and Magog? The Hebrew word shallow used in Ezekiel 38:12 can refer to any valuable plunder, and in our modern context, energy resources are among the most valuable commodities on Earth. The geopolitical implications are staggering. Nations that control energy resources wield enormous influence over the global economy. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries demonstrated this power during the 1973 oil embargo, when they quadrupled oil prices in response to Western support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. The resulting economic crisis led to recession and a fundamental shift in global power dynamics. We've seen how energy resources continue to drive international conflicts. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 was partly motivated by control of energy resources and transit routes. Europe's dependence on Russian natural gas gave Moscow significant leverage over Western policy. The conflict has led to a global energy crisis, with prices spiking and nations scrambling to secure alternative supplies. These modern energy crises echo the resource conflicts described in Ezekiel's prophecy. The prophet speaks of nations forming coalitions to attack Israel and seize its wealth. In our modern context, we see similar coalitions forming around energy interests. OPEC coordinates oil production to influence prices. The International Energy Agency coordinates strategic petroleum reserves among consuming nations. Nations form alliances based on their energy needs and resources. The Hebrew Israelite perspective on these developments is particularly interesting. They see the modern state of Israel as a partial fulfillment of biblical prophecy, but they also believe that the full restoration described in Ezekiel has yet to occur. They interpret current events through the lens of biblical prophecy, seeing patterns that connect ancient warnings to modern realities. For example, they point Ezekiel 36, where God promises, "For I will take you from among the heathen, and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land." They see this as referring not just to the establishment of modern Israel, but to a broader restoration that includes all the scattered tribes of Israel, including those in the African diaspora. This interpretation connects to their understanding of Ezekiel's dry bones vision in chapter 37. The prophet sees a valley full of dry bones that come together and are covered with flesh, representing the restoration of the house of Israel. Hebrew Israelites see this as a prophecy of their own spiritual and cultural awakening, as communities rediscover their heritage and identity. The vision in Ezekiel 21:22 speaks of God gathering the children of Israel from among the heathen, whither they be gone, and will gather them on every side, and bring them into their own land. And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all, and they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms any more at all. This prophecy of reunification resonates with Hebrew Israelite communities, who see themselves as part of the scattered tribes that will eventually be regathered. They interpret modern events, including the discovery of energy resources in Israel and the surrounding region, as signs that these ancient prophecies are beginning to unfold. But their interpretation goes beyond mere ethnic or national restoration. They see Ezekiel's prophecies as part of a larger divine plan that includes all nations and peoples. The prophet speaks repeatedly of God's glory being revealed to all nations through the events he describes. God, "Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord." This universal aspect of Ezekiel's prophecy is crucial to understanding its relevance for our modern world. The prophet isn't just describing the fate of one nation or people, but the unfolding of a divine plan that affects all humanity. The energy crisis and geopolitical conflicts and cultural awakenings of our time are all part of this larger pattern. The Hebrew Israelite movement, despite its focus on African American heritage and identity, ultimately affirms this universal vision. They see their own restoration as part of a larger process that will benefit all nations. As Isaiah prophesied in chapter 49, "I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles, that thou mayest be my salvation unto the end of the earth." This brings us to a crucial question. How should we interpret Ezekiel's prophecies in light of modern developments? Are we seeing the literal fulfillment of ancient predictions, or are these prophecies meant to be understood symbolically? The answer may be both. Biblical prophecy often works on multiple levels, with immediate historical fulfillments pointing toward ultimate spiritual realities. Ezekiel's prophecies about the restoration of Israel had immediate relevance for the Jewish exiles in Babylon, who did indeed return to their land and rebuild the temple. But the prophecies also point toward a greater restoration that transcends any single historical event. The same principle applies to the Gog and Magog prophecy. It may have had relevance for ancient conflicts involving the nations mentioned in Ezekiel's time, but it also points toward ultimate spiritual realities about the conflict between good and evil, the sovereignty of God over human affairs, and the ultimate triumph of divine justice. In our modern context, we can see patterns that echo Ezekiel's prophecies, without necessarily claiming that current events are the literal fulfillment of ancient predictions. The energy crisis, geopolitical conflicts, and cultural movements of our time reflect the same spiritual dynamics that Ezekiel described: the struggle for resources and power, the scattering and gathering of peoples, the revelation of divine justice through historical events. The Hebrew Israelite perspective adds another layer to this interpretation. They see their own experience of exile, oppression, and cultural awakening as part of the larger pattern described in Ezekiel's prophecies. Their emphasis on African American heritage and identity isn't meant to exclude others, but to affirm that God's plan includes all peoples and nations. This inclusive vision is reflected in their interpretation of Ezekiel 37, where God promises to take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel his fellows, and will put them with him, even with the stick of Judah, and make them one stick, and they shall be one in mine hand. They see this as a prophecy of the reunification of all the scattered tribes, including those in the African diaspora. But they also recognize that this reunification is ultimately spiritual rather than merely ethnic or political. The one stick represents the unity of all who enter into covenant relationship with God, regardless of their ethnic background. As Paul wrote in Ephesians 2:14, Christ hath made both one, and hath broken down the middle wall of partition between us. This spiritual interpretation doesn't diminish the importance of cultural identity and heritage. The Hebrew Israelite movement celebrates African American culture and history as part of God's plan, while affirming that all peoples are included in the divine covenant. They see their particular experience as contributing to the larger story of human redemption and restoration. Now, let's examine some specific archaeological discoveries that shed light on Ezekiel's world and the broader context of his prophecies. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered between 1947 and 1956 in caves near Qumran, include numerous texts that parallel and illuminate Ezekiel's visions. The War Scroll, also known as the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, describes an apocalyptic battle between good and evil that echoes themes from Ezekiel 38:39. The scroll speaks of nations gathering against Israel, divine intervention through natural disasters, and the ultimate triumph of God's people. The Hebrew terminology used in the War Scroll often echoes the language of Ezekiel's prophecies. Another significant Dead Sea Scroll text is the Temple Scroll, which describes a future temple that will be built in Jerusalem. This connects to Ezekiel's vision of a new temple described in chapters 40-48 of his prophecy. The Temple Scroll provides additional details about the structure and function of this future temple, suggesting that Ezekiel's vision was part of a broader Jewish tradition of restoration prophecy. The Ketef Hinnom Scrolls, discovered in 1979 at a tomb near Jerusalem, are even more significant for understanding Ezekiel's historical context. These tiny silver scrolls contain the oldest known biblical text, dating to around 600, roughly contemporary with Ezekiel's ministry. They contain portions of the priestly blessing from Numbers 6:24-6, demonstrating the antiquity and continuity of biblical traditions. These archaeological discoveries confirm that Ezekiel's prophecies were part of a rich tradition of Jewish apocalyptic literature that flourished during the exile period. They also demonstrate the remarkable preservation of biblical texts over centuries, lending credibility to the accuracy of the prophetic traditions. The excavations at Tel Lachish have revealed another fascinating connection to Ezekiel's world. Lachish was one of the major fortified cities of Judah, and its destruction by the Babylonians in 586 BC is documented both in the biblical account and in archaeological evidence. The Lachish letters, discovered during excavations, provide a contemporary account of the final days of the Kingdom of Judah. One of these letters, written by a military commander to his superior, describes the desperate situation as Babylonian forces closed in on Jerusalem. The letter mentions that we are watching for the signals of Lachish, according to all the indications which my Lord hath given, for we cannot see Azekah. This poignant message captures the final moments of the kingdom that Ezekiel had prophesied would be restored. The archaeological evidence from Lachish and other sites confirms the historical accuracy of the biblical account of the Babylonian conquest. But it also demonstrates the resilience of the Jewish people, who maintained their cultural and religious identity even in exile. This archaeological validation of biblical history strengthens the credibility of Ezekiel's prophecies and their relevance for understanding modern events. The Hebrew Israelite interpretation of these archaeological discoveries is particularly interesting. They see the evidence of destruction and exile as confirming the biblical account of the scattering of the tribes. But they also see the evidence of cultural continuity and eventual restoration as validating their own claims to Israelite heritage. They point to the fact that Jewish communities, maintained their identity and traditions throughout centuries of exile and persecution. They see parallels between this ancient experience and the experience of African Americans, who maintained cultural traditions and spiritual practices despite the trauma of slavery and segregation. The archaeological evidence also reveals the international character of the ancient Near East. Trade networks connected regions from Egypt to Mesopotamia, and cultural influences flowed in all directions. The Israelites were part of this broader international community, and their prophetic traditions reflect awareness of global political and economic dynamics. This international perspective is crucial for understanding Ezekiel's prophecies about Gog and Magog. The prophet wasn't writing in isolation, but was aware of the broader geopolitical forces that shaped his world. His prophecies reflect this international awareness, describing conflicts that involve multiple nations and regions. In our modern context, we can see similar patterns of international interconnection and conflict. The global energy market connects nations around the world, and disruptions in one region can have far-reaching consequences. The Hebrew Israelite perspective on these modern developments draws on this ancient understanding of international dynamics. They see current events as part of the same pattern of conflict and restoration that Ezekiel described. The discovery of energy resources in Israel and the surrounding region, the formation of international coalitions around energy interests, and the ongoing conflicts in the Middle East all echo themes from Ezekiel's prophecies. But they also emphasize that these modern developments are part of a larger divine plan that includes all nations and peoples. The ultimate goal isn't the dominance of one group over others, but the establishment of divine justice and peace that will benefit all humanity. This brings us to one of the most important aspects of Ezekiel's prophecies: their emphasis on divine sovereignty over human affairs. The prophet repeatedly emphasizes that the events he describes are orchestrated by God for the purpose of revealing divine glory and establishing justice on earth. God, and thou shalt come up against my people of Israel, as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days, and I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me, when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. The purpose of the conflict isn't destruction, but revelation, the manifestation of divine power and justice. This theological perspective is central to Hebrew Israelite interpretation of current events. They see modern conflicts and crises not as random occurrences, but as part of a divine plan that will ultimately result in the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. This gives them hope and purpose in the face of ongoing challenges and injustices. The emphasis on divine sovereignty also provides a framework for understanding the role of different nations and peoples in God's plan. Ezekiel's prophecies describe various nations playing different roles in the unfolding drama of history. Some are instruments of divine judgment, others are recipients of divine mercy, but all are ultimately subject to divine sovereignty. This perspective helps explain the Hebrew Israelite emphasis on both particular identity and universal inclusion. They see themselves as having a particular role in God's plan, but they also recognize that all nations and peoples are part of the same divine drama. The ultimate goal isn't the elevation of one group over others, but the establishment of divine justice that will benefit all creation. Now, let's explore how these ancient prophecies might be relevant to our modern energy challenges. The connection between Ezekiel's spoil and modern oil resources isn't just speculative. It's based on observable patterns in contemporary geopolitics. Consider the strategic importance of the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil passes. This narrow waterway between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula has been the focus of numerous international crises, as nations recognize that control of this choke point could give them enormous leverage over the global economy. The Eastern Mediterranean has become a new focus of geopolitical competition following the discovery of massive natural gas reserves. The Leviathan field off the coast of Israel, the Zohr field off Egypt, and potential reserves off the coasts of Cyprus and Lebanon have created new dynamics in regional politics. These energy discoveries have led to new alliances and conflicts that echo the patterns described in Ezekiel's prophecies. Turkey has challenged Greek and Cypriot claims to Eastern Mediterranean gas reserves. Russia has used its energy exports as a tool of foreign policy. Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to international sanctions. The Hebrew-Israelite perspective on these developments sees them as potential fulfillments of Ezekiel's prophecies about nations coveting Israel's wealth. They point to the fact that Israel has been transformed from an energy importer to a potential energy exporter, fundamentally altering its strategic position in the region. But they also emphasize that these developments are part of a larger divine plan that transcends mere geopolitics. They see the discovery of energy resources in Israel as a sign of divine blessing and restoration. But they also recognize that these resources come with responsibilities and challenges. The environmental implications of energy development are particularly relevant to prophetic interpretation. Ezekiel's description of divine judgment through natural disasters in chapter 38 has led some interpreters to see connections to climate change and environmental degradation. The burning of fossil fuels contributes to global warming, which in turn leads to more frequent and severe natural disasters. This environmental perspective adds another layer to the Hebrew-Israelite interpretation of current events. They see environmental justice as connected to social justice, recognizing that the communities most affected by environmental degradation are often the same communities that have faced historical oppression and marginalization. The prophetic vision of restoration includes not just human communities, but the entire created order. 6 and 9 describes a time when the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. This vision of ecological harmony is part of the larger prophetic hope for restoration and renewal. The Hebrew-Israelite movement's emphasis on cultural identity and heritage connects to this broader vision of restoration. They see the recovery of their identity as part of a larger process of healing and renewal that includes both human communities and the natural world. This holistic vision is reflected in their interpretation of Ezekiel's temple vision in chapters 40-48. The prophet describes a future temple that will be the center of a restored land, with a river flowing from the temple that brings life and healing to the surrounding region. This vision connects spiritual restoration with ecological renewal. The river described in Ezekiel 47:1-12 starts as a trickle from the temple threshold, but grows into a mighty river that brings life wherever it flows. The prophet writes, "And it shall come to pass, that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the rivers shall come, and there shall be a very great multitude of fish, because these waters shall come thither. For they shall be healed, and everything shall live whither the river cometh." This vision of life-giving water flowing from the temple has both literal and symbolic significance. In the literal sense, it may refer to actual water sources in the land of Israel. But symbolically, it represents the life-giving power of divine presence and the restoration of right relationship between humanity and the natural world. The Hebrew-Israelite interpretation of this vision connects it to their understanding of cultural and spiritual restoration. They see their own awakening to their heritage as part of this larger process of renewal and healing. The river represents not just physical restoration, but the flow of divine blessing and wisdom that comes through recovered identity and purpose. This brings us to a crucial aspect of prophetic interpretation: the relationship between particular and universal, between specific historical events and broader spiritual realities. Ezekiel's prophecies speak to the particular experience of the Jewish people in exile, but they also address universal themes of justice, restoration, and divine sovereignty. The Hebrew-Israelite movement navigates this tension by affirming both their particular heritage and identity, while recognizing the universal scope of God's plan. They celebrate African American culture and history as part of the biblical narrative, while affirming that all peoples are included in the divine covenant. This balance is reflected in their interpretation of Ezekiel's prophecies about the restoration of Israel. They see these prophecies as referring both to the modern state of Israel and to a broader restoration that includes all the scattered tribes, including those in the African diaspora. But they also recognize that this restoration is ultimately spiritual rather than merely political or ethnic. The spiritual dimension of restoration is emphasized throughout Ezekiel's prophecies. Chapter 6, 26-27, promises, "A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you an heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes. And ye shall keep my judgments, and do them." This promise of spiritual transformation is central to Hebrew Israelite theology. They see their movement not just as a recovery of ethnic identity, but as a spiritual awakening that leads to transformed lives and communities. The emphasis is on righteousness, justice, and obedience to divine law, not on ethnic superiority or exclusion. This spiritual emphasis connects to their interpretation of current events and prophetic fulfillment. They see modern developments not just as political or economic phenomena, but as part of a spiritual drama that will ultimately result in the establishment of divine justice on earth. The energy crisis, geopolitical conflicts, and cultural movements of our time are all part of this larger spiritual narrative. The Hebrew Israelite perspective provides a framework for understanding these events that goes beyond mere political analysis to address deeper questions of meaning and purpose. As we near the end of our exploration, it's important to consider what all of this means for our preparation for potential future crises. If Ezekiel's prophecies do indeed contain warnings about coming energy disruptions and geopolitical conflicts, how should we respond? The prophetic tradition emphasizes both practical preparation and spiritual readiness. The Hebrew Bible contains numerous examples of people who prepared for coming crises through both practical measures and spiritual discipline. Joseph prepared Egypt for 7 years of famine through careful planning and resource management. Nehemiah prepared for the rebuilding of Jerusalem through both practical organization and spiritual renewal. The Hebrew Israelite perspective on preparation emphasizes both individual and community readiness. They advocate for education, economic development, and cultural preservation as practical measures. But they also emphasize spiritual preparation through study of Scripture, prayer, and righteous living. This dual emphasis on practical and spiritual preparation is particularly relevant to potential energy crises. On the practical level, communities can prepare by developing alternative energy sources, improving energy efficiency, and building resilient local economies. On the spiritual level, they can prepare by strengthening their faith, building community solidarity, and committing to justice and righteousness. The prophetic vision ultimately points toward hope rather than despair. Even Ezekiel's most dire warnings are accompanied by promises of restoration and renewal. The prophet who describes the destruction of Jerusalem also describes its rebuilding. The one who warns of coming judgment also promises divine mercy and grace. This prophetic hope is central to the Hebrew Israelite worldview. Despite their emphasis on the historical experience of oppression and exile, their ultimate message is one of restoration and triumph. They see current challenges as birth pangs of a new era, not as signs of ultimate defeat. The archaeological and genetic evidence we've examined supports this narrative of resilience and continuity. The ancient Israelites survived conquest, exile, and dispersion while maintaining their cultural and religious identity. Modern Jewish communities have survived persecution and genocide while contributing to human civilization in countless ways. The Hebrew Israelite movement represents another chapter in this ongoing story of survival and renewal. The DNA evidence from Kiryat Yearim and other sites reveals the complexity of ancient population movements and mixing, but it also confirms the basic historical accuracy of the biblical narrative. The Israelites were indeed part of the broader Canaanite population, but they also developed distinctive cultural and religious practices that set them apart from their neighbors. This genetic and archaeological evidence doesn't resolve all questions about Hebrew Israelite identity claims, but it does provide a framework for understanding the relationship between ancient and modern populations. The emphasis should be on cultural and spiritual continuity rather than genetic purity, recognizing that all human populations are the result of complex historical processes of migration and mixing. The Hebrew Israelite movement's emphasis on African American heritage and identity should be understood in this context. They're not claiming genetic purity or ethnic superiority, but rather affirming their place in the ongoing story of God's people. Their particular experience of exile, oppression, and cultural awakening connects them to the broader biblical narrative of redemption and restoration. This brings us to the ultimate question: are we ready for whatever challenges the future may bring? The prophetic tradition suggests that readiness involves both practical preparation and spiritual transformation. We must be prepared for potential energy crises, geopolitical conflicts, and environmental challenges through wise planning and community building. But we must also be prepared spiritually through faith, hope, and commitment to justice. The Hebrew Israelite perspective offers valuable insights for this preparation. Their emphasis on cultural identity and heritage provides a foundation for community resilience. Their commitment to biblical values provides a framework for ethical decision-making. Their hope for ultimate restoration provides motivation for perseverance through difficult times. But their message is ultimately inclusive rather than exclusive. While they celebrate their particular heritage and identity, they affirm that God's plan includes all nations and peoples. The prophetic vision of restoration includes all nations and peoples who seek justice and righteousness. The divine plan encompasses all of creation, promising healing and renewal for the entire world. So, as we face an uncertain future, we can draw strength from this prophetic vision. The challenges we face, whether energy crisis, climate, or social injustice, are not insurmountable. The same divine power that sustained the ancient Israelites through exile and restoration is available to us today. The archaeological evidence confirms that ancient peoples faced similar challenges and survived through faith, wisdom, and community solidarity. The genetic evidence reveals our common humanity and shared heritage. The prophetic tradition provides both warning and hope, calling us to prepare for challenges while trusting in ultimate divine justice. So, are we ready for Ezekiel's warning? The answer depends on our willingness to learn from the past, prepare for the future, and commit ourselves to the values of justice, righteousness, and community that the prophets proclaimed. The Hebrew Israelite movement offers one model for this preparation, emphasizing both particular identity and universal inclusion, both practical wisdom and spiritual faith. The energy crisis and geopolitical conflicts of our time may indeed echo the patterns described in Ezekiel's prophecies. But if we approach these challenges with the wisdom of the prophetic tradition, we can face them with confidence and hope. The same God who promised restoration to the ancient exiles promises restoration to us today. The question isn't whether we'll face challenges. The question is how we'll respond to them. Will we respond with fear and division, or with faith and unity? Will we hoard resources for ourselves, or share them with our neighbors? Will we seek domination over others, or work for justice and peace? The prophetic tradition calls us to choose the path of righteousness and justice, trusting that divine power will ultimately triumph over human evil. This is the message of Ezekiel's prophecies, and it's the message of the Hebrew Israelite movement today. It's a message of hope for all people, regardless of their ethnic background or cultural identity. The ancient prophecies speak to our modern world because they address timeless human concerns: the struggle for justice, the hope for restoration, the search for meaning and purpose. The Hebrew Israelite interpretation of these prophecies offers valuable insights for our contemporary challenges, emphasizing both particular identity and universal inclusion, both practical wisdom and spiritual faith. As we conclude this exploration, remember that prophecy isn't primarily about predicting the future. It's about understanding the present in light of divine purpose. The prophets called their contemporaries to repentance and renewal, warning of consequences for injustice while promising restoration for righteousness. The same prophetic call echoes through our time. The prophets called their contemporaries to repentance and renewal, warning of consequences for injustice while promising restoration for righteousness. The same prophetic call echoes through our time. We're called to examine our own lives and communities, to repent of injustice and oppression, and to work for the restoration and renewal that the prophets envisioned. This is the ultimate meaning of Ezekiel's prophecies, and it's the ultimate message of the Hebrew Israelite movement. The energy crises and geopolitical conflicts of our time provide opportunities for this prophetic witness. How we respond to these challenges will reveal our true character and values. Will we choose the path of selfishness and division, or the path of justice and community? The Hebrew Israelite movement offers a model for choosing the path of justice and community. Their emphasis on cultural identity and heritage provides a foundation for resilience and hope. Their commitment to biblical values provides a framework for ethical decision-making. Their vision of ultimate restoration provides motivation for perseverance through difficult times. But their message is ultimately for all people, not just those who share their particular heritage. The prophetic vision of restoration includes all nations and peoples who seek justice and righteousness. The divine plan encompasses all of creation, promising healing and renewal for the entire world. So let's embrace this prophetic vision as we face the challenges of our time. Let's prepare practically for potential energy crises and geopolitical conflicts. Let's prepare spiritually through faith, hope, and commitment to justice. Let's work together across all lines of division to build communities of resilience and hope. The ancient prophecies speak to our modern world because they address the deepest human longings for justice, peace, and restoration. The Hebrew Israelite interpretation of these prophecies offers valuable insights for our contemporary challenges. But ultimately, the message is for all of us. We are all part of God's plan. We all have a role to play in the unfolding drama of history, and we all have reason to hope for ultimate restoration and renewal. Tell us what prophecy you see unfolding in our world today. Share this decoded revelation with others who are seeking truth and understanding. Subscribe to join our community of seekers who are exploring the connections between ancient prophecy and modern reality. Together, we can prepare for whatever challenges the future may bring, confident in the ultimate triumph of divine justice and the restoration of all things. What prophecy comes next? Can you decode this sign? The answers may be closer than you think, hidden in the ancient texts that speak to our modern world with surprising relevance and power. The journey of discovery continues, and you're invited to be part of it.